The crowd didn't know what to expect. Her name, Orisa, had been whispered in online forums for weeks, a rumor attached to a legacy so heavy it could anchor a ship. But they were just whispers. In the world of professional wrestling, a world built on spectacle and larger-than-life personas, a famous last name is both a golden ticket and a poison chalice. It gets you through the door, but it also paints a target on your back. The lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the 20,000 people packed into the stadium. There was no bombastic theme music, no pyrotechnics tearing through the air. There was only a low, resonant hum and a thick cloud of white smoke billowing from the entrance tunnel. Then a silhouette. It moved with a deliberateness that felt alien in this environment of frantic energy. She stepped through the smoke, and the world got its first real look. She wasn't what they imagined. There was no Hollywood swagger, no arrogant smirk. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her face a mask of serene focus. She wore simple black gear, unadorned with logos or flashy colors. She walked down the ramp not like a performer, but like a predator moving through its natural habitat. Calm, focused, unbreakable. The veteran champion in the ring, a woman known for her bravado and intimidation, visibly faltered. She saw something in Orisa's eyes that wasn't part of the show. It was the cold, hard glint of authenticity. One look, and you could feel her father's legacy burning in her eyes. But it was a different kind of fire. Not for fame, but for something deeper. The referee signaled for the bell. It rang. When that bell rang, she didn't just fight. She unleashed destiny. The champion charged forward, a storm of fury, expecting to overwhelm the rookie with raw power. But Orisa didn't meet force with force. She yielded. She moved like water, flowing around the attack, her feet barely seeming to touch the canvas. It was uncanny. In an industry defined by thunderous slams and bone-jarring impacts, her style was one of profound silence, a hand on a wrist, a shift in balance, a subtle twist of a joint. The champion's momentum became her own undoing, sending her sprawling to the mat not from a blow, but from a quiet, elegant redirection of her own energy. The crowd was stunned. They had come expecting a brawl, a spectacle of inherited aggression. Instead, they were witnessing an art form. Every move Orisa made was precise, economical, and devastatingly effective. There were no wasted steps, no taunts to the audience, no appeals for their adoration. She was simply there to deconstruct her opponent with the terrifying grace of a surgeon. The end came swiftly. A final, fluid motion left the champion tangled and helpless on the mat. The pin was a formality, a quiet conclusion to a violent ballet. The referee's hand slapped the mat 3 times. The match was over in under 2 minutes. Orisa didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't smile. She simply stood in the center of the ring, looking down at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. The arena was a cacophony of roaring approval and stunned silence, a sound no one had ever heard before. The digital world exploded. Before the broadcast had even cut to commercial, clips of the debut were tearing across social media like a wildfire. Hashtags like Dark the Arrival and Dark Seagal Legacy were trending worldwide. News outlets, from sports blogs to mainstream publications, scrambled to piece together a narrative. The headlines wrote themselves, each one trying to capture the lightning in a bottle they had just witnessed. The Ghost, Seagal's daughter, shocks the world. Aikido, not acting, a new era of combat. The most dangerous debut in WWE history. Pundits and podcasters dedicated entire segments to dissecting those 2 minutes of television. They compared her to her father, frame by frame, analyzing her movements, her stare, her chilling efficiency. They called her an enigma, a prodigy, a game changer. The company's executives were in a state of controlled chaos. They knew they had something special, but they didn't know what it was. Their carefully crafted marketing plan, which had centered around her famous name and a more traditional wrestling persona, was now shredded. Orisa hadn't followed the script. She hadn't just played a character, she had revealed a truth. And that truth was far more compelling and far more terrifying than anything their writers could have conceived. They had planned to introduce a new star, but in 120 seconds of silent, brutal artistry, Orisa had introduced an entirely new universe. Now they, and the entire world, were left scrambling to understand its rules. Backstage, the atmosphere was thick with a mixture of awe and resentment. In the locker room, the other wrestlers watched the monitors in disbelief. Some were professionals, impressed by the raw skill and unique approach she brought to the ring. They saw innovation, a new style that could elevate everyone. But others saw a threat. They saw an outsider, a celebrity's child who had been allowed to bypass the years of grinding work in small gyms and independent shows that they had all endured. They whispered in corners, their voices low. "She didn't pay her dues. It's a gimmick. Let's see how she handles a real fight. That stuff doesn't work when you're hurt and tired." The victory created a chasm, isolating her immediately. A well-meaning veteran approached her as she was packing her bag, intending to offer a word of congratulations and advice. "Hey, kid, that was something else. Welcome to the show." Orisa merely nodded, her eyes distant and unreadable. She offered no handshake, no smile, no shared moment of camaraderie. The door to her world remained closed. She ate alone. She stretched in a secluded corner of the gym. The thunderous applause of the crowd faded into a profound silence that followed her everywhere. Her explosive debut hadn't been a coronation. It had been a declaration of solitude. She was in the company, but she was not one of them. The victory felt less like a trophy and more like the bars of a cage. To understand the silence, you have to understand the noise she was born into. The world saw her as the daughter of Steven Seagal, the action hero. They saw the ponytailed, stone-faced movie star who dispatched villains with effortless, bone-breaking finality. They assumed his life was her life, his art was her art. But a legacy is a shadow, and shadows can obscure the truth. The narration takes us back, not to a Hollywood film set, but to a quiet, minimalist dojo. Sunlight streams through paper screens. We see a small girl, Orisa, sitting perfectly still in the corner. She's not watching her father with a child's adoration. She's studying him, observing the way he moves, the way others react to him, the immense gravity of his presence. It's not a lesson in martial arts. It's a lesson in survival. The weight of his name was a constant pressure, an expectation whispered by strangers and implied in every interaction. Everyone assumed she was being groomed to be his successor, a carbon copy of his on-screen persona. They expected her to be loud, arrogant, and untouchable. But in the quiet moments, away from the cameras and the sycophants, she learned a different lesson. She saw the isolation that came with that persona. She saw the fragility behind the unbreakable facade. She wasn't watching a hero. She was watching a man trapped inside his own legend, and she quietly vowed she would never be imprisoned in the same way. Her training was an act of quiet rebellion. The world assumed she learned at her father's feet, absorbing the aggressive, show-stopping techniques he made famous. The truth was far more subtle. After her father's lessons were over, another teacher would emerge from the shadows. It was an old master, a friend of her grandfather, a man who saw the turmoil in the young girl's soul. His philosophy was not about dominance. It was about balance. He never taught her how to break a wrist. He taught her how to control a center of gravity. He never taught her how to win a fight. He taught her how to end a conflict. Their sessions were held in secret, at dawn, in a secluded garden. While her father's dojo echoed with sharp ki-ais and the crack of simulated combat, her training was filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. She learned to feel an opponent's intention before they moved. She learned to use the smallest amount of energy to achieve the greatest effect. It was a language of peace, disguised as a martial art. This wasn't training to become the next Steven Seagal. This was training to protect herself from the world that the name Seagal attracted. It was a shield, forged not from aggression, but from tranquility. Each movement she perfected was a silent word in a long, defiant sentence, a sentence that said, "I am not him. I am my own." The machine demanded a sequel. The executives, buoyed by the astronomical ratings and viral buzz, wanted to replicate the debut. More of that, they said. More of the killer instinct. They booked her second match against a brawler, a woman known for her relentless, aggressive style, a human demolition derby. They wanted to see Orisa's calm elegance clash with raw, unbridled fury. They advertised it as an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. The bell rang, and the brawl began. The opponent charged, swinging wildly, looking to overwhelm Orisa. But Orisa didn't perform the same surgical takedowns. She didn't engage. Instead, she evaded. She circled. She parried. She was a ghost, there one moment and gone the next. The match became a frustrating dance of cat and mouse. The crowd, which had been buzzing with anticipation, grew restless. They wanted the devastating precision of her debut, but instead, they were getting a masterclass in avoidance. A few scattered boos began to ripple through the arena. She did win eventually, capitalizing on her opponent's exhaustion with a simple trip and a quick pin. But it was anticlimactic. It lacked the shock and awe of her first appearance. Backstage, the air was cold. A top executive pulled her aside, his face a mask of disappointment. "What was that?" he demanded. "We are selling a monster, a silent killer. We are not selling a pacifist. Give the people what they want, or this experiment is over." He was asking her to be the character they invented, not the person she was. The pressure began to manifest in quiet, unseen ways. In the sterile silence of her private locker room, Orisa sat on a bench, methodically unwrapping the tape from her hands. The roar of the confused crowd still echoed in her ears. Her gaze fell upon a small, worn photograph she had propped up against her gear bag. It was a picture of a woman with a kind smile, someone the world had never known. The door creaked open. It was the same veteran from her first night, the one whose offer of advice had been met with silence. This time he didn't speak with the bravado of a fellow performer. He spoke with the quiet concern of a person who recognized a soul in turmoil. "You all right, kid?" he asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. "That's a heavy crown they've put on your head." Orisa continued to stare at the photograph, her hands finally still. For the first time since she arrived, her voice was not a whisper, but it was strained, fragile. "It's not my crown," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "And it's not his legacy." The veteran watched as a single tear escaped her eye, tracing a clean path down her cheek. The unbreakable, unreadable mask she had worn since her arrival had finally fractured. The silent warrior was a myth. Beneath the surface was just a young woman, fighting a war no one else could see, against a ghost everyone else celebrated. The following week, the company made an unexpected decision. They sent Orisa to the ring alone, with no opponent, and placed a live microphone on a stand in the center. The arena buzzed with speculation. The executives, seeing the crack in her armor, decided to lean into it. They expected a heel turn, a moment where she would lash out, embrace the monster persona, and berate the fans for not understanding her. They wanted her to finally become the villain they had written for her. She walked to the ring with that same deliberate calm, but this time, the crowd felt something different. It wasn't intimidation, it was vulnerability. She stood before the microphone for a full minute, and the silence in the arena growing heavier with each passing second. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and steady, amplified for all to hear. "You all came here with an expectation," she began, her gaze sweeping across the thousands of faces. You saw a name, and you built a story around it. A story of a legacy, a story of a shadow. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. But a legacy is a story that has already been written. It's a cage made of someone else's memories. My story is just beginning. She never once mentioned her father's name. She didn't have to. She was no longer running from the shadow, she was stepping out of it and defining its edges for the entire world to see. Then, she did something no one expected. She slowly held up her hands, turning them so the cameras could get a clear view of her wrists. They weren't bare. They were wrapped in a very specific, intricate style of white cloth tape, a pattern that was not for support, but for ceremony. "This art," she said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength. "This discipline, it was not a gift from a father to a daughter. It was a promise I made to my mother." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the story the world thought they knew was rewritten in an instant. The closing narration reveals the twist, the unspoken truth that had been hiding in plain sight. Her mother, a quiet woman who had lived her life far from the glare of Hollywood, had been a practitioner of a gentle, defensive martial art. It was her sanctuary, her method of finding peace and stillness in the chaotic orbit of her husband's fame. Orisa's explosive debut wasn't an imitation of her father's on-screen violence. It was a perfect, devastatingly effective demonstration of her mother's strength. It was a tribute, performed on the world's biggest stage, to the quiet warrior no one ever saw. Her fight wasn't for glory or to continue a legacy. It was an act of reclamation. She had to walk through her father's shadow, let the world believe she was his reflection, just so she could finally stand in the light and show them whose daughter she truly was. The destiny she unleashed that night wasn't his. It was hers, finally kept. A silent promise to her mother, now heard by millions.